Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show, Carly in Spirit. We are here with Bronwen, who is an art historian and my favorite person to pick their brain. We've had such incredible conversations, and I think they're honestly so funny. They're my favorite. So I'm like, every time we have a conversation, I'm like, we need to record this. Because it's just like it just gets wilder and wilder. Some of our conversations have kind of broke my brain a little bit. But yeah, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Bronwen. The B in Bronwen stands for brain breaking. No, I'm just kidding. Um, but yeah, I finished my master's in art history, and I'll be continuing my studies in art history in my PhD this coming year. I focus on like occult art, women artists, um, and modern art. And so I think the way I guess this came about was I was telling Carly about my project for my master's dissertation, which was like on rose and lily symbolism in like late 1800s, early 1900s art by women artists. Um, and we just realized how much overlap there was between like our both of our understandings of the symbolism. So pretty crazy conversation. I'm excited to like return to it. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. I know I wanted to revisit that because I just feel like it should be recorded because I just think it's like gold. But also, like in my perception of you, I honestly feel like you're a puzzle maker. And I know I said this to you before of like, and I was exploring the concept of puzzles a few months ago of like how we're all puzzle pieces.
Mhm.
And I feel like, in just talking with you and having conversations with you, you really try to fit the puzzles together. So it's like you're like this grandmaster and you see all these puzzles and the symbolism and the history and art and you're like trying to like figure it out and put all the puzzles together. And I find that so interesting. You have such a unique perspective on art and history, and I find that there's so much symbolism in that. It's just like in terms of spirituality, because I come from a spiritual perspective, and from a spiritual perspective, what it really is like a neutrality, and it's like an overall all seeing of the oneness and trying to put it together in a human context in the 3D. And we also talked about multidimensionality too. Um, which like woven together like I think pretty quantum, and so like it's really cool to have these kinds of quantum conversations with you because I know that you can really hold that vision because you see beyond it because you're also trying to figure it out in just like in the way that, how your brain works. So I find that really cool. What do you feel like is the symbolism of the rose?
Well, that's the big question that we could spend hours talking about.
Yeah.
But I guess like I'll start with what I know or what I've done research on. And so I started out thinking about the rose and lily together in terms of like thinking about duality and oneness. Because there seemed to be like throughout, I guess a lot of my my research, like you said, is like fitting together pieces of puzzles, like bringing together like artists and artwork that you wouldn't expect to like put in dialogue with each other, to show that how similar and how connected everybody is, even from different contexts and time periods and countries. And I noticed like as I was starting my research project how all these artists, like regardless of their, what spiritual like institution they identify with or their, like location or time of place or origin, um, they all are trying to communicate this like idea of a return to oneness and spiritual enlightenment, which is like, you know, as we know, very interconnected. And one of the ways that like people conceptualize or people have conceptualized the return to oneness is like through, okay, so oneness and the opposition of oneness is like separation, and often we see it in terms of dualities and oppositions. And so the rose and lily symbolism, and seemingly a lot of artists like art, visual languages, I guess, um, is like this idea of duality and like harmony. So what I was looking at was specifically the artist Hilma af Klint. who is like a Swedish artist. She was born in like the late 1800s, and in the early 1900s, she began a practice where she was making art through these like messages from beyond, from the high ones, as she called them, spirit guides, maybe, other spirits, divinities, angels, who knows, right? But so exciting. And so she had this like really complex like visual language. And one of the things that she was really interested in is this idea of dual work. So almost like twin flames, soulmates, a lot of different countries have, and like different spiritualities and schools of thought have different words for it. Um, but this idea of like two soul or one soul, I guess, in two bodies, two people who were like compatible in like a divine way, connected in a divine way. And she conceptualized this idea of like duality through different symbolism. So she had three different ways that she conceptualized this. We don't have to talk about all of them because it's too complicated. But one of them was the rose and lily. And so in her life and her artwork, she was the rose. And one of her partners, I guess, like artistic slash maybe romantic, slash like really close friend slash like spiritual partner, was the lily. And so for Helena Clint, the rose was like masculine, which is really interesting, and it represented the masculine principle. So she was like the masculine principle, kind of like a yin yang type of thing. And then this other woman, whose name I'm not remembering right now, because I forget which one of them it was, but I can double check that, was the lily. And so she represented the feminine principle. But there's like, obviously, it's more complicated than that. And then there's ideas from both flowers about, so the masculine and the feminine. So there's that duality. There's the physical and the spiritual. So a lot of symbolism I'm seeing, because roses are like often seen in like thought of in terms of like the red rose. This is like the quintessential rose. And the red is like the physical world in so many different schools of thought and symbol, like artist symbolism. And then white, of course, is like represents like purity and spirituality and like the higher dimension. So there's this as well. So I'm thinking about it in terms of duality, but like everybody is influenced by so much symbolism throughout history. And there's like literally so much with the rose. Like there's Christian symbolism, there's probably like Hindu symbolism. Um, there's, like non-spiritual symbolism. And so super, super interesting. But we'll start there.
Okay, I love this because every time you talk, even though we've had like similar conversations because we've talked about the rose so much because there is so much to say.
Mhm.
Every time my reaction is like, "Oh my God, I'm getting like all these downloads and it activates so much within me." So, um, what you were saying what you were saying about, because I don't remember if you've ever explained it specifically that way to me before, and you were saying how um I don't remember all the names, but this person was talking about like the rose and the lily, and they were talking about two souls or one soul in two bodies.
Mhm.
That's twin flames.
Exactly. It's really similar. That's why I was asking you the other day about Twin Flames, because I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Because like it's like a really similar like concept, but just a different name to what she had. And I've seen it in so many different contexts as well. Actually, this is really interesting. So the reason that I did the Rose and Lily is because I wanted to talk about spiritual like concepts of androgyny, but not androgyny in terms of like gender neutral presenting or gender neutral expression, but androgyny in terms of like um, this like really old concept. It actually comes from like Plato, but it's been like reworked throughout Western history and other cultures. But androgyny is like the Western word for it, and it's like this idea of like the original human who was like double, and so the androgyne was like half male and half female, and when it split apart, um, it created two souls who were constantly searching for each other. There was also kind of interesting side note is there was also double female like original humans and double male, and that's why we have three different sexualities. That's what Plato was interested in for this story. But spirituality, the androgyne is like this symbolism of like the masculine in the feminine and the interconnection and the harmony between these principles, and not opposition like we've kind of grown up to believe. And so that's why I was so interested in twin flames, because that was like basically a different name for what my project was on originally. I just had to like focus on the rose and lily because there was too much symbols. So cool.
So the like with twin flames, yeah, it's the same soul but in two separate bodies.
Mhm.
or like different aspects of your soul. It's not like the whole soul.
Mhm.
Whatever. That's a whole bit other thing that we talked about.
Mhm.
Um, but so are you saying like the rose and the lily represents twin flames?
In Helma af Klint's symbolism, that's one of her ways to represent them. And so I looked at it in other artists' work, and there does seem to be like ideas of like gendered principles, like masculine and feminine, associated with the rose and lily or the rose or whatever. But the other thing that's really important, I think, about it that I've seen come up in like so many um, contexts is the representation of like the rose and lily as like the spiritual and the material world. And I think there's like different ideas about it, but like I also started noticing that the Rider Waite tarot deck, my go-to, is there's like a ton of rose and lily symbolism in it. So much so that I think I told you this last time we were working together, was that the original like back design from like the back of the cards was like a rose and lily pattern. So
Mm-hmm.
so you see roses on their own and lilies on their own sometimes, and there's other flowers in the deck as well with their own meanings. But rose and lily keep coming up together in the same cards. You see it. The one that I was really excited to find recently was like on the Hierophant card. So we've got the Hierophant, and then we've got his two like disciples or students on either side, and one of them wears a cloak with a lily pattern, and the other one wears a cloak with the rose pattern. Usually, when you see pillars come up in the Rider Waite deck, which is in the back of the Hierophant, it has to do with duality. Like I think in like the High Priestess card, there's also pillars. A lot of the major arcana has it, and the Magician also. And the Magician card is all about the balance between, well, one of the big things about the Magician card is the balance between the spiritual and material world. So he has the wand, and he's harnessing spiritual energy to manifest in the physical world. And in his garden, which represents like abundance and manifestation, there are roses and lilies. So cool.
Well, I just want to speak to that because I was also thinking like in terms of like roses and lilies being such a huge theme for artists who are channels because that's what's happening. Um, yeah. And like in spirituality and in channels and like channeling the rose and the lily and how twin flames has been such a huge topic the last few years, really this year and last year, but the last few years. Um, and like with twin flames, in my perception, it is the same soul in two different bodies. And there's a specific mission with that. Like with, we come to human school in this earth plane to like learn and try to figure things out and like try to make things better and, whatever it is we think is right. And we're just trying to do whatever. It's really like at the core of that, it's really like expansion, learning about love and happiness because we have the contrast being in this dimension. We don't really have a contrast when we're in source because it's just love and happiness. But to have that contrast and to really understand and learn love is interesting because to reach enlightenment, ascended mastery, the high priestess, expansion, and ascension is it's like that's really what the twin flame experience is about. It's really like the expansion, like learning about yourself in a different way and like accelerating timelines and really like ascending, like becoming the ascended master is like goal. For a lot of twins is like, the main like mission. I mean, there's many missions, right? Depending on the dynamic of the soul. But like that's just how I see that. And I'm just seeing like how I'm hoping this is making sense because it's making sense in my brain. I'm trying to articulate it so that it's tangible. But like why it's so popular of like the lily and the rose and representing twin flames is like representing ascension. It's like representing like expansion, ascended mastery, the high priestess, and also when the duality of, I mean, oh, this can go so far. My brain is like, whoosh. The duality between masculine and feminine energy. Masculine energy is really how I see like the earth plane It's really
Mhm.
like the action oriented, the doer, the focus, the like the executioner. So like the divine feminine has like the idea and it's the channel spirituality, it is the sky. So
Mhm.
I think it was you. Maybe I talked about this with you. Whereas like the masculine is like the earth, like representing the earth, and like the feminine is representing the sky.
Oh yeah, I feel like we talked about this. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and like the duality of that, and like we have both energies within us,
Mhm.
and like mastering both, like we can have that kind of twin flame dynamic within us because
Mhm.
it is the dynamic between the masculine and feminine energy. So it's like I can hone into my intuitive abilities and channel and get all these downloads for the mission, the goal, whatever, the expansion, do my personal development work. But if I don't have my masculine, which is my action, my action steps, my organization, my doing, the drive, the stability, like if I don't have that, then I can't have the feminine. If I don't have the feminine, I can't have the masculine. Right? So it's kind of like the like having both and like coming within union within yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you can like the rose and lily, the idea of dualities, the masculine and feminine. It's all about yeah, ascension and enlightenment. Actually, so this is okay, so two things. Because I want to talk about ascension and enlightenment together, and then I want to talk about love. But love I feel like is kind of a quicker. But I feel like love is like super important, like divine love. This comes up in like a lot of concepts. And I think the idea that like the way that people how do I say I think one of the reasons that using uh like thinking of these like dualities and unity in terms of like a romantic relationship or like like a soulmate or like two people pairing is because it's how we think about love in the physical plane, um and it's like oftentimes seen as the highest form of love, which I don't think that's like the only way to see it, but and so that's how we conceptualize it. So that's really important. Love is super important. But then the idea of ascension, okay, so interesting. So Helma af Klint's her first kind of like big project was the paintings for the temple, and they basically like narrate this idea of like it's like the fall from one, and then like the dissolution of like matter into physical world, etc., this whole process that got us here, and then coming back into that sense of unity. And she wanted, this is so cool, she wanted to exhibit it specifically in a spiral shaped um like building, and then you would ascend in a spiral all the way to the top where the last paintings would be. And those are the ones that like represent, the ascension and the enlightenment. And it's interesting because the tarot major arcana also represents like the fool's journey to enlightenment. And that's more personal, right? That's like kind of thinking about it in terms of an individual's journey. So either way, yeah, it's all about finding that unity within yourself and others and everything eventually. So cool.
Okay. There's so much. There's so much, and I feel like okay, this topic is coming up because it's coming to the forefront of my brain. Of what you were just describing of like okay, well there's so much more with the rose because we're gonna circle back to the rose because Rebecca Campbell is what really got me into the rose. Um, but what you were just describing of like the oneness. So I am going to bring up this multidimensionality piece.
Yes.
And there's so much with that of like in the oneness, and mm, we don't really have a concept of awareness
Mhm.
in like the really, really higher dimensions. So like
Mhm.
8 and higher, right? 9, 10, 11, 12, like higher, higher, higher. We don't have a concept of awareness. It is just a sea of one. There's no individuality. So like I become a we because I become my oversoul, and my oversoul is a collection of all experiences of across all planes, times, dimensions of me,
Mhm.
we-ish, my
Yeah.
free soul frequency, my soul frequency. And like I find it really interesting how like, you know, we've talked about the gods and goddesses before on Earth. And I was talking about this thing of emotions because I've been exploring the concept of emotions the last few months as well. And I've just been exploring these like really, really deep things that have been coming up for me in past lives and in this life. And how our spirit guides and our angels and our gods and goddesses like also experience emotions, but we were talking about how like in multidimensionality, when you lower your frequency and you come down to like the lower dimensions, you get to experience emotions. So it's kind of
Mhm.
like, um, oh, it was so perfect. This is why we should, whenever we get together, we really need to record our conversations. It was so good. It was like, do you remember what we were talking about? Because I want to articulate it the same way that we did that day because it was wild.
About the dimensions?
The what?
Was it about the dimensions?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah, what were we talking about?
We were like, it was so good. It was kind of like,
It was really good. I feel like I should have written everything down, but maybe I didn't. I feel like I wrote some things down.
because this is definitely related to twin flames and the rose and lily. Like, it's
Yeah.
definitely related to the symbolism of that
Oh,
because,
well, we were talking about like maybe this is different from the dimension. But no, yeah. I feel like we were talking about the dimensions in terms of like theosophical ideas of like the fall from one or something. But
yes,
I don't know too
yes.
much about that. So I feel like I don't really remember what I said, but I don't think like I have a ton of information off the top of my head
Me
for
too.
that. But what
But it was so good how like, um, I don't remember what the point of it was, but it's just so it's so cool. Like it's just so interesting to think about
yeah.
how we are all a sea of oneness, and in the oneness, we when the oneness drops down a dimension,
Mhm.
for an example, whatever dimension that would be, it kind of creates different souls. So now we're
Mhm.
creating different souls. And now I'm created. So now I'm here. And then I
Yeah.
drop down a different dimension. And now there's more of me. And then another dimension. And I'm like, oh, and now I have emotions. And now I can remember my experiences. Because when we're in the oneness, we don't, it's not like there's no awareness. So there is no, oh, Carly experienced this. Or like
Mhm.
past life, Carly experienced this. There is no that. It is just oneness of just love, pure divine love. It's just like, um, we kind of like forget there's no identity is kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
like that's our goal in Earth School is to like reach enlightenment, which is
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
funny. Is to like remember that and to learn about ourselves, to really, really learn about ourselves because we have identity down here. We don't have identity up there, whatever that means. And like I just feel like that's so interesting how we have so much symbolism in describing that duality that we have here in the 3D
Mhm.
and talking about the gods and goddesses, that walked the earth and the different symbolism that they use because I read about goddess Athena from
Mhm.
Rebecca Campbell.
Mhm.
And that was something that I was thinking about and I was like, well, if the gods and goddesses incarnated on earth
Mhm.
like eons ago, whatever. I was trying to like make sense of it because I'm like, well, how did they fit that much energy in a human body? And
Mhm.
I was just kind of like, well, they're, you know, an aspect of their soul came down just like how an aspect of our soul comes down because to fit all of that knowledge and all that experience in your brain, it's it's kind of a lot. And like that's why I was like sometimes our conversations my brain breaks a little bit because I'm like, whoa, like this is wild. But have you heard of the story? And I read this in Rebecca Campbell's Oracle book,
Mhm.
The Rose Oracle,
Mhm.
and she talks about how like many gods and goddesses have used the symbols of the roses and the lilies, and it was a sign of like secrecy, confidentiality, safety, and like the divine feminine, which is why when I brought this up to you, you're like, in some symbolism, it represents the masculine. And I'm like, well, that's interesting that
Yeah.
more of the divine feminine would use it as a sense of safety, because that makes sense. Because
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
if it's a sign of divine masculine, then it's a sign of safety. But there was a story of Athena of how something with her twin flame, and there was something, I don't remember this story exactly. I'm not sure if you know it, but she bled for her twin flame, and her blood
Oh,
is what turned the white rose red.
I think we talked about this really briefly. So I've heard the story, but I heard it as being Aphrodite. Um,
Oh, okay.
but I mean, like, totally could be like any of the goddesses.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, yeah, I think I read it as Aphrodite, and she like, because also she is very like connected to the physical world, right? Like the
Mhm.
physical world, in ways that like I don't necessarily think of Athena, but she is too. But I just feel like Athena's more cerebral. Athena's like an air sign, and like Aphrodite is like I don't know, like an earth sign or what. But 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 yeah, like she bled. I don't know if it was like she stepped on a thorn, and so the rose, which was once white originally, became red. And so it's this idea of like the white rose, which could represent, you know, purity or spirituality or the metaphysical world, um, through someone's like blood became through a physical, you know, part of someone's body, um, became, you know, the red rose. But also it's interesting because it's like the rose, like you saying about like things, secrecy and protection, and the rose, the way it's like shaped is like it's hidden in on itself, you know, like it's like wrapped around itself, like almost like the core is protected by all the petals. And that's kind of interesting. I just thought of that when you were talking.
Yeah. And that's why I was trying to figure out, like, just for me, of like, what does it represent for me? Because we were also thinking of how it can represent the masculine and the feminine.
Yeah,
And so the rose could also represent twin flames within itself, too.
I feel like it could. I totally think so. Yeah. Because I feel like the rose is more, I feel like it's a more encompassing or like all encompassing or multifaceted symbol than the lily. I think it comes out
Mhm.
more. I think it definitely has that more of that like inherent, yeah, multi, yeah.
So,
But
like,
mhm,
maybe the rose could also represent the oneness.
I think it could. And I feel like I've seen artists that like are probably using it in that way, but I just haven't been able to like verify this yet.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah. I
I
want to see if
mean, hmm?
I want to see if I can pull up some artworks, but we'll see. But keep talking while I do.
Okay. Um, I find it so like, oh my God, it's so interesting. I love how like us humans try to figure it all out.
Mhm. So fun.
It is fun. I mean, that's why we're here, right? And just to learn, like, to look, because what I'm trying to get at, and this is what I've been exploring the last few months, of like trying to get back to like the like ancient culture and
Mhm.
like what um the high priestesses used to use, and like high priests um in sacred ceremony and energy healing and ascension process and things like that. Like, I feel like there's a lot of practices that have been lost, but there's so much that has been kept, like in symbolism, for example, like in tarot. Like, there's so much in tarot that I can't even like. I've been diving deep into really exploring and learning tarot. um
Yeah.
there's so much symbolism in that by itself that we could probably talk for hours on.
Oh, yeah.
um
So interesting.
so if the lily represents the feminine, like what else does it represent?
Um, from what I've actually been able to like verify, the feminine, spiritual. Oh, I have a list of definitions. From her notebook. Actually, do I have the book? I may have left it at my parents'. Um, but oh, and then so this is really cool. So she was very like meticulous with her like her artistic practice and her spiritual practice. I mean, the two are interconnected. And so she left like a ton of notebooks with documents on here, on like definitions of like symbolism and stuff like that. Let me see if I have like a notes. Oh, yeah. And
There's
so like there's so much. But yeah. Also, you're like, this is cool, but it's like not great. She also had like I just like remembered. She had an entire like series that was called The Rose. And I can't remember what that one was specifically about, but it was clearly really important. Um, there's also, oh yeah, true. There's also like the Rose and Cross, which is like an esoteric society that I think a lot of the artists were like interested in.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, okay. So like actually she says this in one of her notebooks, is that the rose and lily, the symbolism together, represents the conquest of the pain of duality, which is interesting. Um the rose, okay, wait. My notes on this. Oh, where did I put the thing? Um Using the draft paper. But yeah, but there hasn't been a lot of writing on I have like a million notes. There hasn't been a ton of writing on the floral symbolism in Hill Hopkins' work. I think there's just like so much to write about. Ah, yeah. The okay, yeah. So we talked about color symbolism already. Also, I'm like realizing that I'm wearing white and red, so that's cute. Accident.
Stop.
Oh, this is interesting. Okay, okay. Here's some notes. So okay, in her notebook, there's this like term that I was so some of the terms are like acronyms, like WU, or like some of the terms are like words in Swedish, which was her language, the language she spoke. There is one term that I could not find a definition for in Swedish. Like I don't think it's a Swedish word. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's like andejo. It's Andehjo. And she defines it in her notebooks as rose and lily. So I was like, ooh, like let's Google individual words in Swedish. And it means spirit apparently in Swedish. That's very interesting. Um, the color symbolism is like super, super important.
Well,
But
because
yeah,
there's so many different colors of the same flower,
mhm.
which I
But
find
that's
super
interesting as well.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like pink, right? Pink is like a color that roses can be, for example. I mean, rose in many languages, like rose or like rosa, means pink. Um,
Mm.
so that's also interesting. But pink like could be that idea of unity between spirit and physical. But yeah, there's not a ton like of definitions on Lily. It's important within that idea of like that gendered pairing, but it doesn't seem to be as like as important in the imagery in her work as the rose. The rose is like major.
So I'm trying to write down my thoughts because I feel like there's so many. The the
Okay.
spirits the spirits are saying because I was like, "Oh, we're trying to figure it out." And they're like, "Why don't you just ask
Ooh,
us?"
okay. Well, actually, yes, we should ask the spirits. But here's some notes that I found that are helpful. So she defines rose och lilia, which is Swedish for rose and lily. I'm not pronouncing that right. I don't speak Swedish. Uh, and then she defines it in her notebook with just the infinity symbol. And I think we talked about this because I was like, "Ooh, infinity, interesting."
Yeah. Oh.
I was thinking, okay, I don't know if I mentioned this to you or if I thought of it after our conversation because my brain was like spinning. Um, but so oh, okay, that's kind of confusing because rose is defined as a symbol of the astral world and the agent of will. I guess will kind of makes sense. We're thinking about it in terms of masculine. And then lily is defined as perfection and love, which perfection and love seems like, oneness and love to me.
Yeah, the divine.
Exactly. Yeah, right, because the divine is like perfect, in a way anything can be.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, so Rosa Clelia, it's like it equals sign, and then it's just the infinity symbol in her notes, and then it's the essence of everything. Okay, well, we can figure out what that means. But the infinity sign, I was thinking about this, and I was like, infinity sign is like super important in a lot of ways. Obviously, infinity, oneness, etc. But the infinity sign is also like the number eight sideways, and
Yeah.
eight is the representation of balance in a lot of numerology, right? And so like it's kind of like infinity, but also like balance between whatever the duality.
The duality.
So that's
This
cool.
is this is like okay. I mean, we can go really out there. Like I feel like in the 3D like on Earth, like there's so much the duality between earth and spirit or earth and space, earth and the divine, like there's so
Mhm.
much symbolism in that. And I like off the top of my head, I was just thinking, I'm like, do other planets also experience this? Do other
Yeah.
planets have so much duality that or like so much symbolism that we do? We're trying to figure it out. But okay, so there's a few things that you said. Because when my spirit guides are talking to me, they're like, "You can just ask us," and I'm
Yeah.
like, "I love that," and but I'm not in channel mode.
Fair.
Like, I love that, but I'm not in channel mode. But so, they come through sometimes. But what they're saying, and like I really felt this in January when I made my membership the Sacred Rose,
Mhm.
um, which just means it's like a safe space. That's basically what it means. The Sacred
Yeah,
Rose means like safe
yeah.
space. Um,
Crazy because that's like kind of what my name means. But in terms of white and not rose.
yeah, isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Oh my God, I love that. Okay, so many synchronicities. Um,
Yeah.
but they're basically saying like the ancient practices of the rose like want to come back online, which is why I was so like obsessed with it for so long. And I still am, but I love the rose. I really want to learn more about the rose, which is why we're having these conversations.
Mhm.
But the ancient practices of the rose want to come back online, and I'm really trying to figure out like what that means and like what that really looks like. Which is why I started with, okay, the sacred rose. So we're going to create a safe space, which is what, and I heard this, and I want to come up with more tangible examples of this, but ancient high priestesses and goddesses um, would use the rose as a symbol on a door of like if the container is going to be a sacred space. So they would like put the rose on the door or like a thing, whatever, like a temple, and it on a temple, and ooh, which is why I want to see if like ancient temples have roses on them. And they would like as like, hey, this is a sacred space. Like this is kind of like the magic of like you can't hear what we say in here. Like whatever we say in here stays in here kind of situation.
Oh, true, true, true.
So,
Ooh,
like I really wonder if like ancient temples or like sacred spaces like have symbols of the rose and or lily. Do you know what I
ooh,
mean?
okay. Yeah, totally. Well, actually, so something that I kind of was like a sideline of this project that I just had to do for some like background research is so in a lot of the occult art, they're working with like really abstract form. So like not representational of things in the real world, which is, a good way to represent concepts that we don't have visual equivalencies for in this world. So abstraction was like a really big part of my project in the beginning. And so abstraction and like vegetal, floral, like natural symbolism brings you to ornamentation, which is like a tradition in art that's like in between representation and abstraction. So like if you've ever seen like a column that has like leafy looking ornaments around the side, or like a vaguely like floral or like reed looking like decoration, like a palmette or something like that. And so the rose and lily could totally come up in that in terms of like architectural decoration. I can't think of like a good example of the rose, but like it's a pretty popular motif that like kind of the way the petals look, like a roundish flower with overlapping petals, definitely is like a really popular like architectural motif. Um, and so it's interesting that you say like, yeah, it's like secret spaces.
Yeah. Like and that's just kind of what I'm getting. And they just wanted me to look up the Temple of the Rose or the Rose Temple. And I feel like that'd be really cool to
Yeah.
research.
That sounds familiar.
The Rose Temple or the Temple of the Rose.
I think
Rose
that is
Temple.
like important, but I can't think of where I'd heard of that.
Sacred space. The Divine Feminine. Yeah, like there's multiple things about that, but I mean that are like current today, but I'm trying to look up like ancient stuff, like more of like the history because that's so interesting and I feel like the membership that I've started, it was channeled
Uh-huh.
because I had a different name for it. I had different idea, different name, and like I was like, okay, I'm just open to whatever wants to come in, and it was basically like it's like creating that like the temple. It's like a temple,
Yeah.
with the
Well,
rose symbol, and I'm just like so interested in
the rose, okay, so
history behind that.
The Rosicrucianism, which I briefly mentioned, I think, in our one of our conversations, they had a temple of the rose. So this is kind of interesting. And they use the symbolism of the rose and like the cross, like the crucifix. Um, and I was like doing a little bit of research on this because some of the artists that I was looking at were inspired by Rosicrucianism. And in the symbolism, it looks like there's sort of gendered associations with the rose and the cross. Sometimes there's a lily in there too, which is really interesting. But it's like a spiritual movement from like kind of early modern Europe. And basically, um, like, I think it was like in early modern Germany, um, there was like this manuscript, the Fama Fraternitatis Rosae Crucis, the fame of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, um, was like circulated among like German occultists. It was said to be like this guy, like Christ, I think his name was Christian Rosenkreutz, who was like buried with all of these like secret texts on various esoteric, um, information and teachings. And so throughout kind of like early modern to I guess now I think there's still a Rosicrucian order. People have like tried to find these texts or like interpret it what might have been his messages and stuff. So another kind of big like modern Western like sort of alternative spirituality movement, and yeah, and so like pretty interesting symbolism here. There's like because it's also like because of the cross, like it's also very like Christian influenced, and so it's like how we were talking about like the rose and lily in Christian symbolism, for example, comes up as well.
Okay, so
Very cool.
when I look this up, I also see the Oracle of the Rose.
Ooh.
The Oracle of the Rose. This is so interesting because this has been coming up a lot, and I've just been getting like messages really of like oracling. So oracling is like um the act or the channel of channeling your oversoul. So like your
Mm,
higher self, oversoul, the collection of you, and like bringing that into the physical vessel and like channeling.
mm,
Um, which, you know, you would need to like your energy would need to be very expanded and very wide to like hold such large energy. It's really, really
mm,
big field.
mm,
And I've been getting a lot of messages of like I feel like Mother Rose is really trying to communicate.
mm,
Because that's the thing, I feel like because everything has a consciousness.
mm,
And so I really feel like the rose has a consciousness, which is what
mm,
Rebecca Campbell talks about in her little book description of the rose or in her rose oracle deck. Um, and how Mother Rose wants to really communicate. And I just find it so interesting. And I'm just like, I'm getting internal chills.
yeah, me too. Whenever I talk about this, I get chills. It's like, yeah, so intense.
Yeah, I just feel like because in what the rose represented to me in January, and January transformed a lot for me. And I just feel like each month I'm just a new person. Like each month I was just like transformed, like it's a whole new thing. But January, like the rose really represented divine love.
Mm,
And I knew that divine love really wanted to come back to the planet, like the true definition of divine love. And I'm reading a book called The Codes of Divine Love by Christina Rice.
cool.
If anyone wants to check it out, I feel like it's a must read, The Codes of Divine Love. And on her book cover is the rose.
Oh my God.
I know.
I know
So
that.
I know. And I asked her why she chose this, like the rose as her symbol. Um, and but I just find that so interesting of like how the rose can represent so many things. Like the rose, I feel like can also represent divine love, but also healing.
Mm,
Like I feel like it has a very healing energy to it.
mm,
And to be honest, like I feel like that really wants to be shared right now. Because sorry, they're just giving me information. I feel like with the divine masculine, there has been a lot of disempowered masculine energy on the planet. And I know I've also embodied that too of like the not balancing out with my feminine. So like the hustle and the grind and the work harder and the ethics behind that and the relationship with money, because the divine masculine has a very healthy relationship with money, has a very healthy relationship with work, very
mm,
healthy relationship with ethics and emotions as well, is able to communicate. So and for me, I was in my disempowered masculine for a long time. And I had to heal that. And I feel like the rose is a symbol and is a healing tool to really heal the divine masculine, to come back into balance, to come back into balance of the feminine and masculine within yourself and unity.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Mm.
That resonates. I haven't seen anything like that in like my own research, but like that totally resonates.
I will create it and then you can research
I
me.
know. Perfect.
Um, oh my God, it's so cool. It's so cool. Divine love. Yeah, there's so much like, well, for me, I'm going through another big transformation as I'm like in the middle of moving. And there's so much more that I'm going to be changing. Um, and like new offers I'm going to be putting out soon, which is really exciting the next couple months. But yeah, like I love energy work, and I feel like conversations like this are so activating. Like
Mhm.
especially when we're talking about symbolism, like I said, like the puzzle pieces, like finding puzzle pieces is activating,
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
you know?
Those are
Like
great
it
concepts.
activates because like I feel like what we're looking for really is divine union,
Mm.
connection, and unity, community. You know, I feel like the
Exactly.
human is like looking for community. Like that's what the human's looking for.
Yeah. And I feel like my research is like that too. It's like I'm looking at individuals who were looking for that divine union or that divine love and that unity, and then I'm putting them in dialogue in a way that a lot of scholars haven't done yet. And in hopes that other people who are reading it can, scholarly and non-scholarly, can like find some of that unity as well. But like I just think it's so interesting. Everything is so connected, and I don't think people like care about that enough. That's like my thing. I connect things. I make little connections.
Yeah, you connect it and you bring it together and like I feel like you bring it together in such a tangible way so people can understand it. Like I feel like I'm so quantum that I'm just like, oh my God, all these things. But you like really bring it together in such a tangible way for people and like for you doing this type of work means that we can just figure it out faster, is how I
It
feel.
takes a lot of editing, but
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
do. Because what's the point if everybody, or not everybody, but as many people as possible can't appreciate it or can't get something out of it? That's like my this is like not related, like it's not relevant to this podcast, but that's my beef with like academic writing. Is that like this is like really important, but like half the world or like 75% of the world can't actually read this because it's incomprehensible. So so but yeah, like I don't know. It's just so exciting and interesting. And it's so cool to talk about like art stuff in a spiritual context because I'm used to talking about spiritual art in an artistic academic context. And so I have to kind of tone it down a little bit. But it's so fun talking to you about this because I'm like then I can see it from like multiple perspectives and from like a contemporary perspective as well.
Yeah, like, well, that's the thing, like, so interesting because I would also say that the contemporary perspective is the ancient perspective
Of course.
in terms of spirituality, because if we think about the contemporary perspective being different than the ancient perspective, in terms of what it was meant to be, if that makes sense, in terms of what it was meant to be spiritually and like within divine love,
Mhm.
whereas the human has twisted things in history and in the past to make it not love.
Mhm.
Do
Yeah.
you know what I'm
Yeah,
trying
of
to get
course.
at?
Yeah.
To make it not love. So like ancient practices of love and of healing, like I feel like, bringing that back is my contemporary perspective. And I honestly feel like art is spirituality. I feel like it really all is. Like it all is spirituality because spirituality is so broad. It's such a broad term that I feel like as humans, again, we put everything in a box and with a label and with a definition. And I don't really like to put limitations on things like that. Whereas, like, art to me is like channeled. And it's so beautiful because art is coming from the person's soul. Like it's coming from their higher self and their soul and their gifts and their magic. So like that is spiritual. Like that is, you know.
Because art is how people see the world, and that's the same thing with spirituality. Like
Mhm.
different words for the same thing, for same
Yeah.
phenomena. But yeah, totally, 100%.
It's expression. It's expression in
Yeah,
its purest form.
exactly, exactly.
And there was something that and this ties back into something that you mentioned way earlier that I forget. I forget like what you said, but you said something about human pain.
Oh yeah, the pain of duality.
Oh, the pain of duality.
Yeah.
And
I
I'm
find
like,
that really,
that's so beautiful.
yeah, right? Like the because then so it's like okay, if we're in a state of like some kind of state of pain, then like what's I guess what's the opposite of pain? Like bliss, maybe? Or like because I don't think the opposite of pain, I guess it could be pleasure. Um and so when you conquer the pain of duality, as to use Helm Apklin's words, through the symbolism of the rose and lily, through that whatever either twin flame work, that dual work, or like that enlightenment, then you experience like, and everybody talks about it in terms of like enlightenment as like the highest form of like ecstasy, which is really interesting, and like you see that in so many religions and spiritualities. So that's like kind of cool,
Yeah.
which is kind of like not to be too lewd, but it's kind of like like it makes sense that we use like sexual or romantic union to conceptualize this like idea of like spiritual ecstasy and the ecstasy of union because it's kind of like a a conclusion, shall we say, sorts. So it's like really
Mhm.
it's like so many ways to describe energy in ways like analogies for to describe energy because and I think that's like what's so interesting about symbolism is that it's like how we put something into words or images that we have no other way to do it. And I think that's why like art is so cool.
Yes. And oh, so many things. The thing is like when you talk, I get like 10 downloads.
I
I'm
love that.
trying to like figure it out. There's so much there. Well, I find that there's so much beauty in like the human experience and the way we experience the pain and the contrast and the lessons and really honoring that because you know we need to move on from spiritually bypassing. Like we need to like move on. We need to like we need to get to the emotions. We need to be able to fully express
Yeah.
however we express. And then the next thing is, oh no, I lost it.
Come back.
um oh, it was something about okay, you were saying like with symbolism and how we like try to make sense of things and we write things down based on our perception and how in um ancient times when we didn't have words, we wrote in hieroglyphs and different like
Ah,
symboled
true,
language.
true, true.
And that is so cool. So I would really love to know like what the rose represented back then. That would be so cool. But
Oh,
also like did you ever watch Ancient Aliens on Netflix?
not a ton, but I loved it. I've seen a
Oh my
few
God.
episodes. So good. Love it. Like so jam.
It's no longer on Netflix.
No,
I
stop.
wonder why.
Um,
Because
that's
it told the truth.
oh my God. No, bring back Ancient Aliens.
I know. It was literally like, okay, if you haven't seen the show before, it was really good. I recommend trying to find it. Um, they took it off. And it
On YouTube.
basically was talking about how like the people, like humans would draw in the caves like a symbol of like a being and it looked like it with a space helmet and it looked like a being it was like carved into the stone and how like the same being was carved into another stone across the world and how there was no travel yet like there was no boats there was no travel there was you couldn't swim there right so it's like how did two places on earth where there's no travel
Mhm.
or communication as of that time period was able to draw the same being that is not a human, right? So I was like, wow, and they're like translating the stone and like doing all this stuff. So I find that it's so interesting how the origins of human language was symbols.
Yeah, so interesting. I also was thinking like just like in terms of like origins of humanity and pre-travel, pre-contact with other parts of the world, where the rose is from and how many places it's like indigenous to. Oh,
Ooh.
that would be interesting. I'm gonna Google that really quick. But I feel like that would be really interesting, like to see because I mostly have seen it in the context of like sort of like Europe, and like Central, like Western Asia, like this kind of chunk of the world. And so I'm assuming it's like an old world flower, but like,
So this is really interesting. Um, I feel like that's another piece to your puzzle.
oh, Asia, but other with smaller numbers native to, yeah, Europe, North America, and Africa. Oh, so it's like a lot of the world. That's cool.
Okay, so somebody told me to watch this show called Life on Our Planet, and I swear it was
Oh
you.
yeah. I feel like I don't think I've recommended it because I've only seen a few episodes, but it's pretty good.
So I'm living in a timeline where Bronwen recommended this to me because I swear it was
Maybe
you,
I
but it
will
wasn't
recommend.
actually you. But it wasn't actually. I want to. The Matrix glitched out. The Matrix glitched out on me. It might have been somebody else, but no. Honestly, we're gonna experience more of that, more of the time warping. But it's so interesting. So, life on our planet. They were talking. I watched the whole thing. It's kind of boring in my personal opinion,
Yeah, I like
but
it,
it's
but like
educational.
I can't like pay attention the whole time.
No, it's educational
I'm
though.
not there for the visuals.
So they showed the first flower being born, and I don't remember if it was a lily or if it was a rose. But they
Interesting.
talked about the first flower and how
Right.
like the first flower like it blossomed and then it created like this nectar for like to attract the insects to like pollinate it basically so it can like reproduce.
That's so cool.
Oh, it's so, Life on Our Planet, like it's a fascinating series. It's so fascinating about how life grew on our planet. I mean, there's gaps because Atlantis and Lemuria and the gods and goddesses and the war and like there's gaps, right? Like,
Of course.
but the first flower, I don't know. I feel like it was a lily.
Oh, it says it was like the Vidali, but it was like it was one of the earliest flowering plants and it barely had petals. So it could have been like the ancestor of the rose or lily for sure.
Mhm.
Kind of looks like ooh. Oh my God. It grows in buds of two. Interesting.
Okay, the duality there.
Yeah.
Twin
I
flame.
what? That's cool. I don't know. There's like a couple different articles on it, so I'll have to do some more cross-referencing. But yeah, like in this picture, it looks kind of like a lotus, but then in the other pictures, it looks more like buds on a, which is the lotus. Oh, we could talk about the lotus for a while as well.
Oh, the
As,
lotus. We've never
as a
talked about the
Pisces, I talk
lotus.
about the lotus for ages. But yeah, like all these pictures look like a lotus flower, but then this one other picture had like buds. But the lotus is super interesting, and I feel like I saw this could be I could be making this up or maybe I will find this out later, but I think I read somewhere that that like the lotus like kind of looks like the rose and lily together,
Well,
because the
oh my
lily is like
God. I
open.
was literally thinking that.
Yeah, okay, so right, like the lily is like open and the rose is kind of like closed. It kind of looks like the center of the lotus, but also the lotus I'm pretty sure in like multiple contexts like represents spiritual enlightenment. So could be, oh, maybe it was in Helma af Klint. Yeah, could have been.
Okay, so the lotus is the symbol of the Akashic Records.
Oh, of course.
Of course, it's a symbol of the Akashic Records. My teacher, and multiple teachers teach this, which I don't use the lotus
Ah.
anymore, but like when you're connecting in with the Akashic Records and you're first learning, you're opening up the lotus flower and you're going
Yeah.
inside the lotus flower for your knowledge and wisdom.
Okay, whoa. Oh my gosh, wait, why did she say one of I just have like this random note and it's like lotus blomma, which is lotus flower in Swedish. And it just it's like a definition and it just the word. Like kind of like the I'm assuming that's like the word as in like logos. Like in the beginning there was the word, like in the Bible. Um, but I don't have any other notes on that, so that's cool. But so interesting. And then this other artist did like this really cool image of a lotus and it was like oh so this other artist also how much time do we have because I don't know I don't want to start a new point if we are like if we're just
How,
talking
however long, we're good.
okay cool so But there's another artist who I've also kind of really, really, so Hilma af Klint is like pretty popular right now. Um, but there's this other artist whose name is Johanna Natalie Vinch, and she's like, I cannot find, there's very little scholarship on her, but I found out about her through a book on Hilma af Klint. And she was also kind of like a channel-esque artist. Like she was institutionalized for schizophrenia in the early 1900s, I think, when she was like sort of like middle-aged, I think. And she created this like series of really like innovative, like super progressive, like super modern, like not, I don't know, just like super unconventional embroideries that she created through what she like through higher messages as well. Um, and so really like crazy works. They're uh like symbolism and like letters and like Greek and English, or not English, in French and German, um, like floral symbolism. And I keep seeing roses and lilies in her work. And so one of her nickname, can't find a proper scholarly source for this, but according to her Wikipedia, her nickname was Lily, which is interesting. And I keep seeing roses next to the names of men in her life. So like male doctors that that were like that treated her really well, or like fellow patients that she was close to. And she also had like a twin flame that she thought was her twin flame. And it was this guy that she just like met like literally once. Like they never really had a relationship. I don't know if she ever saw him again. Um, but she saw herself as like the feminine to his masculine. Same thing. It's like this like dual work, this twin flame concept. And in a lot of the where's the one that has like so much of the duality? In a lot of her embroideries, the roses come up next to his name, which is really interesting. But she has this really cool one, that's called, oh, I guess lotuses come up a lot um in her work. And I like would love to know what they mean, but there's not enough scholarship done on her. But it's just so interesting because it's like again, completely different context. Um, but clearly floral symbolism, roses and lilies, do have to do with that idea of conquest of duality and the masculine and feminine principles. So, really interesting. And she has this, oh yeah, okay, so she has this one called I Am Radio. It looks like a lotus, but it's like, wait, is it that one? Bear with me. Oh, I think it's like in the very center or something. Hmm.
So you reminded me of our conversation of the oneness and the gods and goddesses.
Mm.
You were saying that?
Oh, yeah, yeah, because we're talking about like that was the other thing I was gonna bring up is like gender of gods and goddesses and like gender and sex and principles in the other dimensions. So I feel like
Yeah.
that
Well, it's not gender.
not gender,
It's
but
a human thing.
yeah.
Um, Not the gender, but the energy. So like for example, um, we can okay, great. I was gonna use Sanat Kumara as an example. He's a galactic being from Venus that I work closely with. But Odin came to mind. So for an example, Odin, like the god Odin, and how he's very like strong. He looks very masculine, like in the traditional 3D human sense, right? Um, he he's very strong, very capable, feels very safe, like he's carrying like this like staff thing. And he like looks like he's prepared for like battle, basically. He's all about like psychic protection. It's like how I see him. I mean, I know there's like a million channels out there and they'll say something different, I'm sure, but like how I see him is very like protective, and so like that's like the divine masculine. And like for an example, goddess Isis, who is also very strong, but she represents the warrior feminine because there's different archetypes within the feminine and different archetypes within the masculine. And she represents like very like warrior-esque strength of the feminine. And we were talking, and I was like, if the gods and goddesses have a divine masculine or divine feminine energy, and as humans we're trying to balance out the two between our within ourselves,
Mm.
did the gods and goddesses also balance it out within themselves, or like are we perceiving them as a divine masculine or as a divine feminine? Are we perceiving them that way because they are lowering their vibration to meet us so that we can channel them? And so by lowering their vibration, they're creating an archetype for themselves because they're at a lower density.
Yes.
Because when you're
Side
in the
note.
oneness, we're in the oneness. We're not, there is no archetype, there is no awareness, there is no identity. So, like, when they're lowering their vibration, they're creating an identity. So, like, if the gods and goddesses, if we met them at like the 10th dimension, like, would they even have an archetype?
True. Because like you're saying, at that highest dimension, there's no emotion, there's no identity. Okay, side note, Isis is the lotus bearer. I didn't know if you knew.
Wait,
That's her
what?
Isis's symbol is the lotus. Fun fact. So crazy
Shut up.
example. Yeah, I was like, I swear, like she has something to do with the lotus. I googled it, and it's like, yeah, she is like her
That's why
actual
she's here.
lotus bearing. So that's crazy. But yeah, like the idea of like, because we were talking about like the dimensions and how like in theosophy they have this sort of like Adam and Eve-esque story about
Mhm.
fall from oneness to it's like from like agender, like to use like a human physical world word, but like from nothing to like no like distinction to like duality, like to being like kind of masculine feminine together in one, and then to separation. And so like
Yeah.
very familiar with this, right? And then so like in Hilma af Klint's understanding of the world and higher realms, angels, she said you could call them man, woman. So angels are like both or neither, maybe.
Angels are both or neither. Yeah, because they're at a higher frequency.
And then also like going back to the tarot, the temperance figure in the like Rider Waite, like in Waite's Arthur Waite's description of the symbolism in the cards, he specifically states the temperance angel is androgynous. um, and it pours, it's balance. It's all about the balance of, different, the different realms. So very cool. Yeah, very
Oh my
interesting.
God, I love that. And then we were also thinking, because like I was trying to figure out the gods and goddesses, and like I was trying to figure out, well, my human is trying to figure not really hierarchy, but like where everyone stands, because like technically
Mm,
there is no hierarchy. We just think linearly, which is
yeah,
why our brains broke that day. Because we
yeah.
think literally
Think linear,
we were like,
linear,
oh my God,
the
this is a
linear arrow
lot.
theory.
There's a lot. But I was like, okay, so like the angels at the seventh dimension,
Hmm.
and higher. Angels of the seventh dimension, if they were to come down to the sixth or fifth, we would perceive them as having more of an identity. But them chilling at the seventh, let's say the gods and goddesses are now at the sixth because the gods and goddesses have more of an identity and
Yeah,
more of an archetype because the angels, like, when you want to call, like, the angels are more a little bit more infinite. Like, it's interesting to perceive it because the angels is like you work with them as the angel of hope, the angel of love, the angel of protection, the angel of confidence. It's not really like a name like goddess Isis. Like, it's not like they don't have a name. Do you know what I
yeah.
mean? Like
Well, yeah, they're
angel of
kind of
hope.
like energies or concepts, and that's why like there's so much overlap between like like you'll see it in like the Nigerian pantheon. There's like an Aphrodite-esque goddess, and like everywhere there's like different gods that are completely different, but there's you know like they represent such similar energies and properties, which is super cool.
It makes me think about the archangels because the archangels do have names
Mm-hmm.
and they are the leaders of the angels, whereas the angels don't have names. But the archangels, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
as humans, we like to put a masculine feminine energy on them. Like Archangel Michael feels more masculine, but maybe that's because Archangel Michael works closely with Earth, and maybe because he's lowering his frequency a little bit to meet us, kind of like so we can channel each other. Maybe he has more of an archetype,
Mm-hmm.
more of like a identity. I just find it like so interesting, like Archangel Gabriel, how he's for communication. Like that's more of like a concept. Like he's great for like he's the angel of communication. Um, but how he has a name, and we say he because we're in the duality
Yeah,
space. But I find it really interesting. I don't know. I'm just thinking about the angels now and how the archangels have names, but the angels do not because there's
yeah.
like infinite. it like infinite.
Mhm.
It's so brain breaking.
Yeah, I know, and it's like hard because we're kind of like like sifting through so many different people's conceptualizations of such like intangible things through like we're like at the we're like whatever how many thousand years into human civilization, so we're like working with that much and more meanings of everything. It's like wow, you really got to work your whole brain.
Hmm. Yeah, because I mean, like, thank you for doing this work because it's like for me, I'm just like, oh, well, I trust my opinion and, anyone else's is, I don't care. I mean, I do care. Like, this is why we're here having this conversation because I love perspective. But I'm like, oh, I have my perspective and that's all I need. Whereas you're like, I need everyone's perspective. You're like, I got to figure this out. You're like, what is this? And you're trying to sift through it and in your research. And I find that so interesting because your brain must hold a lot of information.
Yeah, it does. That's why I'm really bad at remembering little things like birthdays and and what I if I ate today.
Right? It's such a
Yeah,
human, it's such a novelty.
no. But it's how I form my own perspective as well. Like I take what I want, but I take everybody's, well, as many people's as I can's perspective into consideration because I think that's interesting. It's holistic.
Hmm. I feel like it all can be true.
That's what I'm saying, yeah. Because it's you know, everybody has a different perspective. Like, okay, you could everyone interprets like every experience differently. Like nobody can have the exact same experience, even if like we were both in the exact same tiny room at the same time. We both perceived it and experienced it differently. But it doesn't mean it wasn't true for one of us. And so like same with you know anything. Yeah, I think it can all be true, and I think it's like interesting to like look for the overlap because I feel like that's like the highest truth. Not to get too preachy.
Yeah. Yeah. And this just reminds me of time. Like time can be a whole other
Mm,
I, I'm currently exploring the concept of time and
I'm
it's breaking my brain a little bit too. I think I love that though. Like I love like the quantum and the big things. Like, you know,
me too.
trying to figure it out.
Yeah, no, time is crazy. I think time is like time's out of my wheelhouse right now, but I've always found it interesting.
Yeah, it's oh, anyways, we do not have enough time to dive into that one.
No pun intended.
Maybe next time.
Yeah.
Um, do you have any more thoughts on to wrap up Rose and Lily?
Mm. I'm trying to think if there's anything we like talked about before that hasn't been captured here. Mm,
Probably a lot.
definitely a lot, but I feel like the main points were touched on. I do have some notes for like future research, so I'll look at that real quick. But I think I already told you. Oh, but I probably wouldn't have told you over here. Oh, this is too tangential. Um, oh, but it was Athena actually, I think. The goddess of
Was
war.
it?
The with the blood. Yeah, you were right. I just thought it would be Aphrodite because she seems like into flowers, but then I read a quote and it was the goddess of war.
I think Aphrodite might have been involved.
Yeah, maybe they were like having an argument. This
I
happens a
think
lot.
it was a thing. I think it was a
Yeah,
human
I feel
thing
like she's involved.
with and Athena. There was something with Athena and her twin flame, but I feel like maybe Aphrodite was involved somehow.
They may have been fighting over the same guy.
Maybe.
Because Aphrodite, well,
That's a twin.
I can't remember. I can't remember because there's a lot of interrelations in Greek mythology. But
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, no, I think
which I find interesting. Oh, that's interesting.
I was just thinking about Artemis.
Relationships.
um and like the moon, and but this is getting too far, so but I do love talking about gods and goddesses, so we can definitely
Yeah.
we'll have to return
Yeah.
with new symbolism to look at.
I mean, we could probably do a whole segment.
If you want. Just
Um, like, okay, divine love and relationships. I find this so interesting.
Mhm.
And I would love, I mean, maybe in the future to like channel one of the gods or goddesses and just ask them questions.
That would be really, really cool.
I feel like that would be so cool. I'd be like, what can you tell us? Um, yeah. Well, thank you so much. Loved having you on. You're definitely gonna come back. So,
Yeah,
thank
no,
you
thank you
so
so much
much.
for having me. This was so much fun. I mean, it's always fun to talk to you, but it's cool to like capture it so we can go back to it as well and share with other people.